Yeah, awesome. Well, first and foremost, we brought T-shirts. So let's just get that out of the way. There's T-shirts, and there's also T-shirts in the booth. But we'll give you guys some T-shirts when you're ready. So they're actually pretty cool. Well, thank you guys for taking the time to do this. I seen like you guys are so busy in a number of things today. Really want to appreciate that and what we're doing here. Is there anything we can do about those doors back there, bud? Thanks, man. Appreciate that. So I'm Jeff Sizemore. I am the Chief Strategy Officer of Truio. I am joined today with two of my colleagues here, Dan Clark and Bianca. She is the CIO of City of Scottsdale. So we're going to talk today about navigating AI compliance, essential guidelines for public sector governance. This has been one of the more interesting topics for me. I've done a lot of vendor work, but the public sector is somewhat new, especially seeing public sector being early adopters of technology is very new. It's been a great experience for me to learn. So let's go ahead and kind of kick going. Like I said, Dan is our president, and Bianca is one of our customers who uses this in production and really does a great job with her city and her constituents and the way she's looking at it. So we're going to learn some great stuff from them today. You guys want to give a quick minute about yourself? Is that okay?
Yeah, so I'm Bianca Lackner, as I've been introduced. I am very passionate about technology and making a difference in my community, and Scottsdale is just an amazing community. Really, we think very, very known for our beautiful landscape. People come and visit from all over the world. We also host one of the most highly attended sporting events. It's the Waste Management Open in February. This is a golfing event. I think last year we broke the record for the most attended event in North America, 1.2 million visitors for that week. So for perspective, the city population is only 250,000 people. So within that week, we are 4 times the size of the city. So having to manage that, but again, we're very welcoming. We people come and play in the city, come and do business. So we have one of our innovation centers, Kaesong, one of I think the 4 in the country. So again, just very forward-thinking and always the cusp of implementing the latest and best in technology.
I'm Dan Clark. I'm the president. InterEdge is about a 4,000 person software development company. Truio is the platform that's used by hundreds of large enterprise clients to comply with the world's privacy laws. We extended that into AI governance about 18 months ago when I was meeting with the chairman of the FTC. I'd been asked to testify with the Senate when they were considering a federal privacy bill, Cantwell's bill, and gave me the idea that maybe we should think about how to use AI safely, responsibly, securely, and we've developed that platform. We're now in production for about a year now, and as Jeff said, we're kind of first time in the public sector with our platform base.
Yep. I'm pretty much the guy that drives the bus for these two. So I'm our Chief Strategy Officer. I have a pretty deep background in cybersecurity privacy. I started out in a company called PGP, Pretty Good Privacy, way back when, probably the original people trying to solve this problem. Very sad few years there, but it's getting much better these days. So excited to be here with you guys today, and excited to be here to talking with both these lovely folks. So as we get going, let's just start with the basics in AI governance. One of the reasons why people start looking at this is the laws that are happening, right? This is the fastest adopted technology we've ever seen, and it's the fastest regulations that we've ever seen to go along with it. So maybe I start with you, Dan, here, and maybe you could talk a little about some of the existing legislation that's already on the books today.
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time actually working on the legislative landscape. As I mentioned, I testified in the Senate with the federal consideration. I've been involved in the Texas law, the Arizona one, and one of the first questions that you get is, well, there's this sort of wave of new laws coming, but what about existing laws? And in fact, these are being tested today in the court in a number of places. Bias and discrimination is illegal right now. I mean, Title VII, Title IX, these are some of the strongest laws we have in the United States that say you're not allowed to discriminate around race, around color, around age, things like that. And these are being tested now around AI. There's no exemption for, hey, it's AI. Air Canada tried that in their lawsuit. They said it's not a human being and it's not a business, and therefore somehow it's unregulated. That's inaccurate. The courts immediately sided with the plaintiff in this case. We have numerous laws around bias and discrimination in the U.S. We also have laws around privacy. Not every state, but we have 16 states, depending on if you count Florida, 15 or 16. The privacy laws say you need consent to do things. You need to, in some cases, assess the risks of the way you use people's personal information. Again, there's no exemption for AI, and again, this is being tested successfully in the courts. We also have a number of laws around wiretap. In fact, when I founded the company, I never occurred to me that we'd get this tested, but if you're training a model using audio like Peloton did, they found very quickly that you need consent to do that. Every state has at least a single party consent requirement. Where we're standing right now, you need both parties' consent, as you do in California where I live. They had neither party's consent to use it for this particular purpose, and they actually survived, for the attorneys in the room, what's called the Markman hearing phase, or in claim construction. That hasn't happened in a wiretap case in like 40 years. And so I think that this is successfully being tested now, and I think we are going to see you need consent. You need to abide by the privacy elements, and you need to avoid bias and discrimination. There's also a whole wave of new laws kind of coming at us.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit, because I'll be honest here. You know, I've never had it. Whenever I present, I have to go back and look at the laws and make sure nothing's changed week to week, and that truly is where we are with AI governance, whether it's a state or whether it's a region or whether it's a regulatory thing, as Dan's going to show you. But it's moving so fast, and you know, for me, this is why I think about things like product and automation here to keep up with this stuff, because it's just moving at an extreme pace, as it should, to keep up with what we're dealing with. And maybe you could just give us a quick high level of what's happening here, Dan.
Yeah, I think probably doesn't apply to most of the people in the room. The EU's AI Act, which is now law. This actually passed. It was scheduled to be voted in November without an actual data set next month. This passed on February 1st. I think this is unprecedented. I like to say in the history of Europe. I think maybe that's an exaggeration, but it's unprecedented in the history of EU's regulatory environment. They used the unanimous consent provision in all 26 countries, voted on a pre-meeting to go ahead and pass this. Why is that? Even if this doesn't apply to you, because they're under enormous pressure to regulate this area. Legislators want to see safe and responsible AI. The states often step in. As happens. We see this in cybersecurity. We see this in privacy. There's a patchwork of state laws around this. This is what's happening now in AI governance. Colorado has passed the first state law, but this was actually a consortium of 29 states hosted by Connecticut. We see now 12 follower states already with copycat laws to Colorado. This says that you have to be safe and secure. You have to provide appropriate measures of risk assessment. They're focused on bias in this law. California kind of doing their own thing. California is drafting a set of operating rules around this, very focused on notice. The one that's probably the most important for people in this room is the White House executive order. The White House executive order has been turned into OMB number 21, which 21 is the set of draft operating rules under that executive order that says you need to be safe and secure in the way that you apply AI. They have a very ambitious date in their draft to say that you should be compliant by May of next year. I think that's extremely unrealistic, but they're clearly also under pressure. What we see in common across all of these laws, all of these elements, abide by the privacy laws, make sure you have consent, make sure that you are considering bias and discrimination, make sure that you're considering the risks that this could pose, and provide proper notice as an output. You want to comment on this?
Yes, so we also have internally to the city, we have our own regulations. So it's called administrative regulations, and we have one for data privacy that we implemented we crafted about 3 years ago, and we're still implementing. And in one of the areas that we're focusing on the data privacy internally to this city, and it's also for our constituents, is being really open and transparent on what kind of data we collect to provide a service, how we manage, how we store, how we destroy the data. And because we didn't have the full capability to follow through on that, right? So how do you have 250,000 citizens and hundreds of businesses opt in or opt out on their data collection? So this is why we partnered with Truyo to implement their data privacy platform. Last year in December, we also crafted our own internal Gen AI admin regulation, and we're also in the process of implementing that. And because we didn't have a mechanism to do that, we also partnered with Truyo to implement their AI governance platform, and I'll be talking to that here in the next slide, I think, exactly how we went to, about that. But again, we are very much, a progressive city, really citizen-centric, so we want to make sure that we foster and continue to foster that trust element that we have with our constituents, and having those regulations shows kind of the good faith that we have, and that we're very proactive about that. So although some of those laws do not apply to us directly, we know that many of that regulation is going to be coming, and we need to be very proactive about that, and having the framework and platforms to be able to follow through on that is very, very critical for us as a city.
Yeah, and there is one thing I find interesting about it, and really, it's like the government got it right. And what I mean by this is on the horizon. What they did here, I think that's pretty fascinating to me, is they've gotten a number of groups to come and sign on board to these regulations that are in your current industries. I think when you look at a lot of the regulations like privacy, we all want it, but it's pretty soft and hard to enforce. We all try to do the right things because it's just what we should do. We put the DSAR stuff, the web pages, we do this. But the reality is, where are the fines, where are the things, and you see some things in a minor way. But where they got it right this time is they went into the industries that we work at today and made this part of the current processes and how they're audited. So if you're a bank, you're seeing this will be something that you'll see in your audits, and you are seeing it today, already pushed down to your banks. If you're in healthcare, you're seeing it come into healthcare. So the regulations and the way they're already being audited today in your industries, this is already being passed within there. It's already in cyber insurance, of course. But to me, what's most impactful here is the fact that it's in the industries that you see that are already regulated. You want money from your education, you want that grant, you better have AI governance in place. You want to do your audit for financial services. You don't want to create a memorandum or an issue, if you will, a failed audit area. You need to make sure you're handling AI governance. And I think when you define AI governance today, we're not talking about Gen AI. We're talking about the way that the law describes AI, and the way that the law describes it is pretty much anything beyond Boolean logic, right? It's the machine learning we've been doing. It's the natural language processing. It's the work we've already been doing that we need to be tracking, not just the future state of our business. And I think a lot of people mix the facts up of what is AI and what do we really care about. So let's talk about this a little bit, how we got here. Like, you implemented this, Bianca, and you have this in production, which is phenomenal. Can you kind of talk to us a little about how this works?
Yes. So, of course, you cannot govern what you don't understand, right? So for us, it's very important to understand the landscape of AI use cases of the organization. So we know, right, what IT, we have a concurrence process. So every new application, procurement of a new application or service has to go through IT leadership's review. So we have an understanding, but at the same time, we also we're aware that we have some shadow AI, right? So again, and for us, thinking strategically, thinking long term, how can we manage, govern, and empower, right, our employees for them to be easier for them to do the right thing instead of make it harder to do the wrong thing. That's kind of how we think about this. So as I mentioned, I partnered with Truyo, and we started with a series of workshops. So they helped me facilitate workshops with our executives and our leadership team, because I want to make sure that they understood that it's not IT governing this, as a city as a whole governing this. So we identified key stakeholders at the leadership level, those who have decision-making powers, those who can execute on this, and so having a representation from all departments was also critical, including procurement, legal, and risk. So I think that's something that we oversee sometimes, especially thinking of, right, how do we procure this? How do we enter into a contract with a vendor that focuses on AI, and understanding that they have roadmaps, and the risk will continue to come up. So we have to have those key stakeholders as part of the governing process from the beginning. So helping identify those stakeholders, and then helping empowering them, right? So the next step was for us to build, to really interpret our AI policy, right? We had an AI policy, but what does it mean in practice? And with that, we had to develop an AI risk framework. How much risk are we willing to take as a city? And of course, that's for today, right? So we know that we continue to evolve that review process of how much risk we want to take versus the benefit, the value that each AI use case could bring to the city. And then assessing, right, use cases that we knew of through that concurrent process, but also being able to survey our employees for those use cases that were maybe not necessarily approved, right? Because maybe someone went and used their department's card to buy an instance of, I don't know, an AI that summarizes meeting notes, right? But they had no awareness of the risk that specific use case may pose. So being able to, again, have that framework and then automate some of those processes. Who's going to review which use case based on, right, where the use case is located within the organization, and who can make that decision and who can then enforce our policy. And then, of course, identifying the risks and really engaging those employees for them to understand, right, how can we continue to manage this, either offering more training, but of course the training we had to start with the Executive Governance Council to make sure that they feel, again, empowered, educated, aware of the cases, but now they have the tool to really enforce it. And then the next phase, now we're deploying AI training that's also built within the platform for our entire employee population. And then the next step is to, again, review through our procurement process, but also engaging our vendors that, right, we already have, obviously, partnership with. Their applications are within our environment to really understand what's on their roadmap, what kind of AI capabilities are going to be turned on in the near future so that we can, again, run them through this risk framework and make sure that, first of all, right, we minimize the risk, and then we also take advantage of what's coming.
So that's interesting. First off, thank you for sharing this. Anybody wants to, obviously, feel free to take pictures of this, and we're happy to share this information. But one of the things that you answered is how you did this, and I think one of the questions that a lot of people have, and I hear this often, which is it's kind of an overwhelming thing for people coming into this. But where do you get started? Like, what did you think about? Like, one of the first things you were worried about, or when you had that first conversation, like, what were you thinking about? And what did you achieve first?
I think bringing awareness to the leadership level, right? So as an executive, I have a sit at the table, right? So I do have a way to engage with them, right? Either, as a group, as a leadership group, but also individually with my peers or the director of the other departments to really understand what's their business goals, right? And then say, okay, we know that AI can either fast track, optimize, or do more for the organization. So being able to build that within our strategy, I think it's critical, right, to have those conversations, like when it comes to business value, not necessarily the technology itself, right? And having those kind of relationships built in within your organizations is so critical to be able to have those conversations and to be able to, be a trusted partner to say, hey, this is a risk. Let's build something together.
I like that a lot. I mean, getting that communication, I can see why that would be so important for you. What do you think, Dan?
I mean, it's
a tricky question.
It's a tricky question, but I think start with education. I think start with training people, because so many of the problems that you have, exfiltration of data, the security risks, the not having consent, bias, so many of these things can be avoided if you just understand them. So I think education is to me is the first place to start.
Yeah, I kind of have a bit of a different feeling, just because I'm worried about where things are at long term, and I'm the security, like the freaked out security guy in the room all the time. And for me, it's third parties. That's where I get a little bit nervous, because I think we're all pretending we're not using AI, and companies are like, oh, we're not really turning on, it's not happening. But it's coming into your tool sets. It's coming in everywhere and anywhere that we acknowledge, and there are a lot of impacts everywhere. And these vendors are bringing it in under the current agreements, current contracts, and there's a lot of vendors, and there's a lot of things happening. And so the things that were irksome me is the things that I can control, I understand, but the things I can't control, I get a little bit nervous about, being a security guy. And so for me, one of the areas that I get a little bit nervous on is this third parties, and this understanding all of my 2,000, my 20,000 vendors I'm dealing with, and now all of a sudden there's a new purchase coming in, and the new piece of the product's coming in, and they've already done their attestation, and I'm buying this new module. I'm like, well, does this thing have AI in it? Or is this vendor up to date? What do I do? And so I think there's a lot to be said about understanding this AI assessments and how we go about this process and beginning this motion, because it's a big process and it's a lot of vendors coming in. And I think right now it's a little bit of the wild, wild west with people coming in and bringing tools in our environments. And so I think there's a lot of things we need to be thinking about here, from, understanding the processes by that vendor, how they're disclosing, just if they bring in AI, and just as an example, we see a lot with recruiting, HR applications as an example, come in, hey, we're going to automatically filter out resumes. That's great. Click this button. It's great. Well, that's a really big deal. I'm automatically dismissing humans from positions based on something AI is saying that I haven't really validated. That's illegal, right? We have cases that we see all the time that are causing discriminations and issues that are occurring today. And so for me, third-party vendor assessments is kind of a bigger deal, and it's a longer kind of hole in the tent, if you will, that you have to resolve. And it's one of the areas I think that's somewhat of a big deal. But again, everyone is different. Some people come in and say, I just need to start with the basic AI inventory. I want to create a policy. I just want a policy, and I want to put something on my website. But I think if you're really solving this problem, I think you're thinking about the communications to the organization, make sure they understand the priorities, and you're looking at this and starting to work through this process. But I think that this is probably one of the more complex part of this problem to think about in the future and how you automate this motion.
Yeah, I almost want to change my answer. In fact, the Peloton lawsuit that I mentioned, the reason that got exposed was they were using a chatbot from Drift. And Drift, there was no security on it. There was no contractual obligations on Drift whatsoever. And so Drift had this treasure trove of data, and they started selling it. And they were under no obligation not to. If they'd have known that, and in fact, the chief security officer of Peloton publicly stated that nobody told them that they were doing this, and that's why there were no change. The data wasn't encrypted, wasn't secured. There was no change to the contractual elements. In fact, so there's a lot of places I think that you could start, but third parties might be actually even a better answer.
I'll take credit for that. All right. So
I think the chief procurement officers are so important to this process, right? And unfortunately, like she's very involved in the world of purchasing, and they are, starting to build, support within the community to say, okay, how are we thinking about this? How can we be more proactive, but also influence, right, the process more from a federal and state level? So I think that's so critical to have this conversation with your procurement officers to say, hey, it's not us within IT or privacy that have to approve this. They have to be kind of the first line of defense with the legal teams as they review with the contractual language to say who owns the data, how, in case of a breach or bias use, who's responsible, accountable for that.
That's a really good point. Yeah, starting with the procurement officers, they're just doing their job, right? We gotta bring them in the fold. It's a really good point. So, you had a really cool use case. I mean, we typically we'll honestly we start with companies and we ask them what they're doing with AI, and they tell us 2 or 3. We survey employees, we find 5 or 6, and then we turn on auto discovery, and then we find 400. That's the reality of it in most cases. But one of the cases and that I really loved, and I was pretty interested in some of the use cases that Bianca's team brought, in particular, one that is most interesting to me, which is drones. Maybe you could talk a little about this use case.
Yes. So, drones. I think we are one of the first cities to implement drones, and we do it in various ways. So, the most recent one, which is we're one of the first cities to implement this for a specific use case, is with our real-time crime center. So, what this helps is really helps with the situational awareness, right? That is in case of a high-stake operations, right? So the drone is deployed, and aerial view helps those who are part of the dispatch real-time crime center assess the situation before they deploy the unit, right? So the officers, which means that, right, everybody's safer. They take visual images real time, and then those dispatch command center can make real time decisions. Another use case for drone real time crime center is traffic management. So if we have congestions or an accident, they can deploy those emergency responders faster, right? Be able to clear more efficiently. So again, resource allocation really helps with this. Another use case, I mentioned our golf event, and we have other large events, but managing those events in terms of assessing crowd behavior and being able to, right, from large area to surveil and really make those decisions in terms of how do you redirect traffic so that those who attend have a great experience. But also for first responders who need to respond to, let's say, health incidents, so someone's having a heart attack, and there's those crowds, right, they're able to clear and then really dispatch the first responder to that incident. So again, saving lives, right? Another use case we have for drones is within our fire units. for search and rescue missions. So in Scottsdale, I mentioned natural beauty. People come and vacation there, and summertime is quite hot. I think we broke a record for 40 plus days of 112 and over. So in the morning is quite nice. People go and start hiking, right, and they forget to take water or not enough water, and then they're missing on the mountain. So our first responders can deploy drones to locate those and deploy the search mission and obviously again save lives again. And another use case is our fire prevention and conservation. So those drones can be deployed to take aerial images of the landscape, right? So let's say if there is bushes that are overgrown, then I can dispatch those units to cleared and make sure that no fires are happening. So some really great use cases, and I know there's more that we're doing with this, but obviously a great value. But this is not necessarily a use case that we first thought of as, oh, this is AI, right?
Yeah.
But then we realized, what are the risks with those drones, right? First of all, where are they manufactured? Are they manufactured in China, right? They're taking, obviously, pictures of the cities. How do we, how do we store this data? How do we minimize the collection of the data? How do we, within those crowds, right, not single out specific individuals, but collect that and make decisions on the crowd in terms of crowd control. So all those considerations had to be assessed and run through this risk management framework.
Yeah, that's a lot. And you mentioned that in the privacy side of this as well. And I think that's really interesting because there is such a connection here with the things that we're doing with AI and privacy. Maybe you could talk a little bit about kind of the way you think about privacy and AI connecting, because I'm right with you. I think that they're very much synopsis together. I mean, when you're dealing with AI, you're making sure that the data and the privacy is being supported, protected before it's going into these models. There's a lot of stuff going on there. I mean, there certainly is a connection there.
Yeah, obviously we need to make sure it's encrypted at all times. But then for us, I mentioned that trust piece. We have an open data portal on our website. So we always, more and more share more of the data set. So again, our constituents can feel empowered to go and download them and make some inferences from, how we're providing services. But then when it comes to drones, specifically to that data privacy, right, there is always don't trust the government, they're taking pictures of us, what are you doing with that? So we wanted to, again, get in front of that and engage the community on why, right? So all those use cases, public safety, making sure that, right, everybody has a great experience visiting the city. And at the same time, being able to disclose, right, those missions, and not necessarily real time because it's not always possible, but after the event is happening, to really share with larger community, what the mission was, what areas were surveilled, and then how we collected the data and how we're storing or destroying that data. So again, very much proactive and very much continue to build on that trust that the community has within us. So.
Yeah, that's one thing I think I've noticed the most with you guys is the trust and the transparency that you provide to your citizens. I think it's phenomenal. It's second to none that I've seen. No offense to anybody else. Best I've seen.
Very important to us,
Yes. So now that we've done this, we looked at this, I think part of this becomes the output of all of this process. You've done this work, you're doing this, and I think there's notice, I think there's some transparency, and I think there's other side of this too, right? We're talking about, Bianca and how she's operationalizing AI and privacy in a systemic approach to her environment. But there's also people that are trying to sell Bianca products, right? There's also other parts of this. And I think there's also trust and public parts that you're thinking about. Maybe, Dan, you could give us a little bit on notice, transparency, and maybe like how you help, how are we helping with this whole process with vendors and this approach that's going on?
Yeah, I think if you look at the laws that are coming down the pike, in particular, the one from California, the operating rules there, it's and there's a common theme. You should provide proper notice. You should, just like in your privacy policy, you want to say, here's the data that I'm using. You want to do the same thing in your AI notice. You want to be able to say, here's the data that I'm leveraging, here's the decisions that I'm making. You don't have to describe how you make the decisions, but you do need to describe what decisions you're making and be transparent about that. And what we do in our platform is we've actually automated this, because I believe this is going to be changing so rapidly. There's so many regulations, there's so many interpretations, there's so many situations. You have one person who's like, well, they applied for a job, didn't get it. You have another person applied for a job, did get it. You have another person who works here for 10 years, so they never went through that application process. I've just described 3 different situations now in terms of what notice is required. you start to integrate that with all of the various regulations, the various requirements, you very quickly get numerous use cases, and so we've chosen to actually automate the notice process within this, and I think that'll be necessary as we go forward.
Yeah, one thing we did that I'm really a big fan of, it's called a scorecard. And what the scorecard is it's really great for the public sector, because what it really does is it scores each of the agencies in the public sector. So let's say that, when you're Bianca and you have multiple agencies that are working on this, how do you know that they're all doing AI safely? And how do you metric this, and how do you look at, are they biased, are they free of bias, discrimination, PII, are they doing the right things? How do you measure each of these entities, and how do you allow them to do some things and not others? We've really defined this quite well in security from role-based access control, right? I'm going to delegate certain things, I'm going to control certain things, I'm going to have visibility to others. That's one of the key things when you're in public sector that's very important, of how you're doing that between each agency, and how you're communicating up, ultimately from a KPI perspective, and then how you're communicating out to the world and what you're doing and how you're doing. And I think is a very important part of this process. Can you trust your government? Can you trust your people you're working with? So it's a really interesting one, and it's something that I think is a gap in the market, which is, how does she know that our product is safe? How does she know all these products coming in from the AI is going to be safe? Why do you trust it? Why do you believe it? So I think there's a really good opportunity there for all of us to get a little better as vendors and how we're approaching this. So finally, in conclusion here, there is legislation in place today. This isn't new. Discrimination is here. It's happening with AI. AI by default has bias in it. You have to clean this up. You have to watch the data going into these models. You have to make sure AI governance, and the board is paramount to this. They need to understand what's happening in the business and how it's going to impact the company, from culture to compensation to the activities, the roles, the things that we're doing. It's important for everybody to understand how they're going to move forward. Use cases are important here. This is the problem, and I think Dan would say it and everybody would say it. Yeah, you want to measure with NIST, that's great. Unfortunately, NIST doesn't look at use cases. AI is like IT. It's really this broad term at this point that we're talking about, but there's so many different use cases of AI and how it's applicable to your organization and who it applies to. It's not a simple risk assessment. It's a risk assessment based on each use case that you're applying. And obviously there's
a secondary use case that you haven't thought about, so that through this process, we also identify that. And some use cases we thought, okay, for example, the Gen AI tool that many of my colleagues are using to capture meeting minutes, and so their notes, and then summarize notes and sharing with others, right? So the secondary use case was that that those are, right, they could be asked, someone can ask for those minutes for public records request. It's a law that we have to adhere to. So they haven't thought about that, right? So what happens with those minutes and then the summarization, and what if there's no oversight to say, well, so and so said that, but that's not what the meaning of that was, right? And then we have some meetings that are not, things are discussed in terms of economic development or human services. So those are not, those what's being discussed is not ready for public consumption, right? And some of those users might not be really aware that, hey, those are going to be stored in someone's cloud, and anybody can ask, and if they can be discovered, we have to share, right? And can put really the city at risk. So sometimes the secondary use case is also something that we discover through the process, through the governance, through the Trio platform. Yeah.
That's a really good one. Thank you. Yep. Yep. Anything else? Yep. Unless you guys have questions, I think we're good to go. We appreciate it. Hopefully this was helpful, and we appreciate you taking the time today to spend with us. So, thank you.